The revenge, when it came, was in the shape of the Macnaghten trial. Daniel Macnaghten, a woodturner from Glasgow, a radical Chartist, had come to believe that in the early 1840s the Tory government was persecuting him, in particular that he was under surveillance from spies. His family didn't believe him. They thought he was delusional. Whatever, the delusions got so bad that he decided he would assassinate the Prime Minister, Robert Peel. Lurking around Whitehall on the 20th of January 1843, he shot Peel's secretary, Edward Drummond, in the back. It's possible that he had mistaken Drummond for Peel. Drummond would later die from the wound. In the meantime, Macnaghten had been arrested and placed in front of the magistrates, where he claimed, "The Tories in my native city have compelled me to do this. They follow, persecute me wherever I go, and have entirely destroyed my peace of mind. It can be proved by evidence. That is all I have to say." Macnaghten had a bank receipt for £750, a huge amount of money. His father, who back in Glasgow was a respectable politician, applied for the money to be released for Macnaghten's defence. This allowed the hiring of a crack legal team headed up by Alexander Cockburn, one of the country's best barristers. Now, both sides were in no doubt that Macnaghten suffered from delusions. The prosecution, however, was determined to show that he was able to distinguish right from wrong when committing the act. The defence wheeled out an impressive array of medical witnesses. Edward Thomas Munro, of Bedlam family fame, was utterly convinced the delusion was real and Macnaghten was insane and suffering from monomania, as this form of moral insanity was being branded. Sir Alexander Morrison, one of the principal British authorities on madness, with, as he said, not immodestly, nearly half a century's experience in the treatment of persons labouring under different descriptions of insanity, had not the slightest doubt of Macnaghten's insanity. Neither did William Hutchinson, physician to the Royal Lunatic Asylum at Glasgow. And so the procession went on, one medical witness after another reinforcing the diagnosis. Even Gilbert McMurdo, the Newgate prison surgeon, who usually denied the insanity of prisoners under his care, believed Macnaghten to be of unsound mind. And the evidence won the day. The judge, summing up the case, was moved to say, "I have undoubtedly been very much struck, and so have my learned brethren, by the evidence we have heard during the evening from the medical persons who have been examined as to the state of the mind of the unhappy prisoner, for unhappy I must call him in reference to his state of mind." It appears the jury did not even bother to retire before returning their verdict of not guilty on the ground of insanity. There was a public outcry, and politicians and the Queen were deeply uncomfortable about the incursion of the alienists into the courts. It was for this reason that the Macnaghten rules were written, to attempt to curtail this influence. The rules state that the insanity defence would only work if it were clearly proved that, at the time of the committing of the act, the party accused was labouring under such a defect of reason from disease of the mind as not to know the nature and quality of the act he was doing, or if he did not know it, that he did not know he was doing what was wrong. In other words, you could be as mad as a cut snake, but if you were aware that your act was wrong, then you were guilty. Macnaghten may well have been prosecuted under these rules, and it certainly appeared to be an attack upon the notion of moral insanity. You could be impelled to do an act under a delusion, but if you could still judge that the act was wrong, you could be prosecuted. But this did not stop alienists and their neurologists and psychiatrists testifying in the courts. Indeed, right the way through the 19th century, psychiatry became ever more adept at defining who was mad and who was bad. Indeed, despite Macnaghten, the emergence of the psychopath could not be halted. By the 1880s, alienist neurologists like Henry Maudsley were able to argue convincingly for the diagnosis that was being rejected by the rules, homicidal mania, the unstoppable urge to kill or destroy. That this had become an acceptable defence was largely due to the biological turn that had been taken in the mind sciences. Remember when we looked at Esquirol's nosology? Heredity played a part, but it was only a very small part when compared with the environmental and social factors that might trigger madness. As the 19th century wore on, biological determinism gained an increasing force. A biological determinism that was focused upon the idea of degeneration. The important figures here were Benedict Morel, a French psychiatrist, and Charles Darwin, who I'm sure you all know about. Morel believed in degeneration. This was the idea that civilization had created a large underclass of individuals who were living badly and passing their badness on to the next generation. He was essentially a Lamarckian. He believed that the characteristics acquired during a parent's lifetime could be passed on to the children. This meant that barbarism, learnt through the unmonitored working class existence in the horrific urban slums, could be passed between generations, nurture infecting nature, infecting nurture. As a result, the human race was at risk of degenerating into criminals and perverts. His Traité de dégénérescence, published in 1857, proved to be deeply influential, particularly when his ideas were blended with those of Charles Darwin, whose theory initially posited the idea of evolution through natural selection, a much slower process than Lamarckianism, but who then diluted it with a dose of acquired characteristics in the form of pangenesis. Morel Darwin produced the possibility of an atavistic race of criminals who could not help themselves. They could be contained, they could even be prevented from breeding, but they could not be held to be criminally responsible. Of course, this was not the first attempt at naturalising crime. Phrenology, which explored the development of the skull and its relationship to the brain inside and the behaviour of the individual, had been just such a system. It was the child of Johann Spurzheim, an Austrian physician, but it was taken by his understudy, Franz Joseph Gall, and spread as a biological psychological creed throughout Europe. In Britain, during the 1820s and 1830s, it achieved something of the status of medical orthodoxy. It was certainly popular among the rank and file of medicine and was discussed and used within alienism itself. It was also instrumental in debates about the reform of the law and the penal system. By the 1850s, its star had waned somewhat, but the urge to measure skulls and detect pathological difference in the shape and structure of the brain remained strong. And of course, it still remains strong to this day.